to remind everyone that the first week we met, I went through the 5 facets of sexuality, where I really kind of went over the different components related to sexuality, so that when we talked about the different parts of sexuality, it kind of made sense in a way that we could look at how it affects everyone's life, especially that of your children. The second week, we went over the 5 I's of adolescence, which are the developmental milestones that our young people need to be working through to become a sexually healthy adult. And this week, we're going to continue with the theme of 5 and kind of review the 5 core needs of children and adolescents when they come to us with a question, a problem, or a behavior that we're seeing and trying to figure out how to address it. And so these 5 core needs come from the work of Deborah Rothman. And she really established the fact that when our kids come to us with a question or a problem or a behavior that you're seeing, chances are you can use this technique to address what's happening. So let me give you an example. And then we're going to continue on with the presentation in different content areas related to body image, pornography, and relationships. So in my example, and this is a real life example, I had a friend, she's Indian by background, and their son at the time was around 12. And due to like the ethnicity and just, cultural attributes in his own changing body, their son felt very self-conscious about body hair. And he was noticing that he was getting more and more hair. He was getting really uncomfortable. So he took out his iPad and he did what a lot of young people do in an innocent way. He put in the words, boy with a lot of hair and hairy men. And unfortunately, what came up was pornography. And he, started going down the rabbit hole because he had no idea what he was seeing at the time. And then he just kept clicking and clicking and clicking, closed the iPad and thought he cleared the search history, but his dad goes on the iPad and is totally shocked that his son was looking at pornography. When he followed up with his son, this is where I really recognized, I thought they handled it in such a beautiful way, and they kind of went through these 5 core needs. So the first thing that they did was they affirmed that, it was totally normal that he was so curious about what was happening to his body. They didn't shame him. They didn't reprimand him. They really kind of acknowledged that it was normal to be so curious about what was happening because it was confusing and he was scared and he felt really self-conscious. The second thing they did with my support was they gave him some really good books on puberty, as well as started to talk to him about the changes his body was going through. The third thing they did was really clarify and go over some of the values about what was in the content of the porn and how they did not align with, the type of relationships they hoped that he has someday with a partner, that, it really was demeaning to women and that it was objectifying, right? They kind of went through all the values and then they set limits, which is that you shouldn't be looking at porn again. And then the anticipatory guidance was really like, look, questions are going to come up in the future. We want to be your go-to people when you have questions, or these are the books that you can read or to if you have any questions. And so we can use this as a template, as I said, when things come up with your own kids and in your own life. Keep this in your back pocket because I think it can be really helpful. And sometimes not all 5 needs need to be addressed. Sometimes it's just about giving information, or sometimes it's just about setting limits. But I think it's a really brilliant way of addressing questions and problems that may surface. So I'm going to read this quote to you. As a child, I never heard one woman say to me, I love my body. Not my mother, my elder sister, my best friend. No one woman has ever said, I am so proud of my body. So I make sure to say it to Mia because a positive physical outlook has to start at an early age. And I think body image really is so important. I don't know that it's really talked about enough and really becomes the foundation for boys and girls, from the moment they're born in terms of how they feel about their bodies, and the role that we play in fostering good body image. But I would say it is important to recognize this is so key. This is another one of my full circle moments from becoming an educator to a clinician in a practice that helps support people who have challenges with sexual dysfunction, right? The most satisfying sexual experiences occur when people are fully present in in the moment and appreciate their bodies. That's really critical because a lot of times what happens is we see adults later on down the road who really feel that shame and feel anxiety so much so that they can't relax and just experience pleasure, right? So the more we can do now to help our children recognize that their body is a source and a place for experiencing pleasure. And the more that we can do to help them feel good about their bodies, the less likely they will need to seek support and help down the road because of the tension and because of the anxiety or shame or bad feelings that they had associated with growing up. It's the work of Joyce McFadden, who wrote Your Daughter's Bedroom. It's a great book that really, while she targeted her work towards girls, I really think it applies to both girls and boys, right? And so our children will learn through what we say, through what they observe, and through what they observe in our interactions with each other. So we need to really be careful of the comments that we're making. We need to be careful of how we talk to our friends, and we need to be careful that we don't make this about increasing competition with one another, because there is so much power in how we kind of model for our kids what it means to feel good about ourselves. And of course, ultimately what her work found was that there's so much power in the relationship that we have with our kids that really, yields whether or not we feel good about ourselves or not, especially in relation to body image. I always think that, one of the best ways to talk about body image is through using teachable moments. So that was a big buzzword. I don't know. I think it might have been Oprah who started talking about teachable moments, but teachable moments are really using natural opportunities from life to educate kids about things that could be more sensitive, and it kind of levels the playing field and makes it more neutral. And so this was an example that I used often when I was in the classroom, and it's by using Dora, right? A lot of you may remember Dora. I'm sure you could pick out other cartoon characters, but in this particular example, Dora was this little kid who loved adventures. It was all about her backpack and all the exciting places that she could go. Now, of course, marketing and, advertising and wanting to keep the show going, Dora also had to grow up. And so part of Dora became, the new tween Dora. And so you can see here when asked a young child, I can't necessarily read it because the sidebar is covering, but I think what you can see is this little girl kind of starts to notice that the other Dora is full, right? And the new Dora, it's all about her shoes and her dress. And it's no longer about the backpack and the adventures, but really on what she looks like. And so talking to young people about changes like that and how it affects them and how they, perceive and understand not only what marketing companies can do, but how it shifts the focus away from the things that we can do to how we appear. Barbie is another example, right? She's a doll is a doll is a doll. The new movie that came out, lots of controversy and conversations about whether people liked it or not. But I thought that this was fascinating. This girl who's in college actually recreated Barbie. And if she were real, these are the dimensions that she would be holding. She'd stand 6 feet tall. She'd have a 39-inch bust, an 18-inch waist, and 33-inch hips. It would be physically impossible for her to actually walk. And so, just kind of reminding, maybe this isn't a conversation to have with a young child, but just, reminding teenagers that these do leave impressions. And when we look at these types of toys, we start to associate, what ideal images they think should be. It's the same thing with G.I. Joe, again, an action figure that maybe boys aren't playing with today, but we certainly know boys and girls, of course, are, using lots of technology with video games. The picture on the right, comes from a package on a video game that I did a Google search with, and you can see it's no different, right? In 1964, we had pretty much realistic dimensions, and by 2000, they were so enormous that it's really not realistic. And as our kids shift away from playing with toys, one of the first markers of kids growing up that parents often have to face is like, when do I give my kid a phone? And the minute they have a phone or a tablet, any type of a device, it's that gateway to social media. And teens at a baseline feel like everyone's looking at me, right? Teens then who have Instagram and Snapchat, and using the filters and the phones, right? Now it's everyone's looking at me, and I'm also trying to get everyone's attention, and I'm using a filter and my phone is on constantly, right? And so we really need to help them monitor how much they are using these devices, because what we found in one particular study, but I am sure you could all agree, you've probably seen it with your own kids when they're on their devices, when parents took the devices away for 3 weeks, we saw self-esteem and depression go way down. It's the same reason why when parents send their kids to sleepaway camp and they come back and their kids look so shiny and bright and their eyes are wide and they're engaged in conversation. So media is a diet, and it's important that we're mindful of how much we consume. Too much is never okay. The power of words, and these are quotes that a group of 8th grade students gave to me that their parents had expressed to them. Isn't that enough food now? You are wearing that. You need to lose some weight and the tush and stay away from the ice cream. Sometimes I think my mom thinks my body belongs to her and not me, and I hate it. Stop eating so much. These are really powerful words that may have been shared once, maybe multiple times when somebody's young, but I can assure you, I see it in, my own practice when I'm working with clients in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It doesn't matter what age. These are the words that last a lifetime and can play the biggest role in, developing eating disorders and just feeling really badly about how one feels. So really making sure that when you're talking to your kids about their bodies, it's about asking them how they feel. I think it's about trying to use a really neutral voice and, trying to focus on the things that they can accomplish with their body, like the strength that they have or their character, their smile looking really bright, and not about the shape and the size. In my last example, I'm going to share an image from Abercrombie and Fitch. This was in Times Square. And you can see here, Abercrombie and Fitch, sells clothing, but clearly there's more to the story here than just selling clothing. These are two people having an intimate moment. And I want to share this with you because one of the famous associations with Abercrombie and Fitch was the CEO, Mike Jeffries. And if you remember back to the first week when I talked about the box, right, the popularity box and all the traits that went in the middle, and then all the traits that went on the outside, the things that were deemed cool, right, were like about status and power and looking good and having a certain body type and size. Well, this is what Mike Jeffries said. He was the CEO. Abercrombie hires good-looking people in our stores because good-looking people attract other good-looking people, and we want to market to cool, good-looking people. In every school, there are the cool and popular kids, and then there are the not-so-cool kids. Candidly, we go after the cool kids. We go after the attractive, all-American kid with a great attitude and a lot of friends. A lot of people don't belong in our clothes, and they can't belong. Are we exclusionary? Absolutely. Obviously, this is horrific to kind of like understand in context of what this means in terms of the marketing strategy they used. Unfortunately, Mike Jeffries is no longer CEO, but you can see here how it certainly could be a great conversation starter. And I'm going to share these questions with all of you. Obviously, you'll get a copy to really talk about, what the product is selling. What's the story that they want you to feel? Who's the audience? Do they want you to believe in something aside from the product that was actually being sold? These are really great questions that you can use, and apply to anything, whether you're in the car or you see an advertisement on TV or the radio, or things that just come up naturally in life, circulars that come in the mail. And then here are some other questions that I created that are really good to have with your adolescent or teen. I think the best times to talk to our children that are in those middle school and teen years is definitely in the car because they can't escape. But also, at bedtime when the lights are low and there's less eye contact. Teens, notoriously have a really hard time looking at you in the eye. So anytime you have an opportunity to have side-by-side conversation, you're more likely to get a lot more out of it. And of course, if the lights are low and it's before bed, there's far less distractions. So how can we as parents promote the development of a positive and healthy body image? Well, it's by doing all of these things, but I think that most of all, it's about changing our thinking and not so much about changing our bodies, right? And so that being said, it's really important that we talk to teenagers about the fact that we're given our bodies based on DNA and genetics. There's very little that they can do to change that. And I think by explaining it that way, it helps them understand that they got what they got and they got to do the best they can, right, with what they have, instead of trying to live up to an ideal or trying to change and become something that's not realistic for them. And so explaining to young people that, the three basic body types are ectomorphs, which tend to be really tall and thin. Typically, these are the women that you see in fashion magazines. They can lose weight really quickly. The mesomorphs, which are more proportional and smaller. This is where you see like men who have more chiseled, muscles. They could gain and lose weight pretty easily. And then we have endomorphs, which are fuller and rounder. It becomes harder for them to lose weight. And so helping young people recognize the genetic component to the bodies that they're given also allows them to kind of have that acceptance that like there's a range of bodies out there, and it's important to cultivate that it's okay to have a range of friends with various body shapes and sizes. One way you can do that is like asking them, like, who are your top 10 favorite friends and family members, right? They're going to write them all down and then say to them, okay, so which ones do you love based on their body type? Obviously, if they love them, it's not based on body type. And by kind of helping them recognize we don't pick the people that we love based on their bodies, helps them, further illustrate and understand the point about body diversity. I think, also I want to share with you, when my son was a junior in high school, my daughter was entering high school as a freshman, and she was so nervous. And at the time, he said the most brilliant thing. He said to her, Maya, you'll be fine as long as you don't become friends with the popular people. And I thought that was great advice because popularity often gets associated with a lot of drama and a lot of competition. And I share that with you because I think there's also a lot of body competition. And I so appreciate now that he shared that with her, because the more our kids can kind of just focus on what feels like authentic connections instead of connections that are based on the way people look or what they think is cool, the happier they will be. So I don't think my son realized when he said all that, when he said that to her, but it obviously was a very powerful way of saying, just be yourself and don't go chasing popularity. So for body confidence, I don't know why the screen isn't changing. Here we are. I think it's about doing all of these things, particularly talking to your children about puberty before it happens. I mentioned a lot of books. It's about doing all the other things that are listed here. But what I really want to emphasize, because I think it's really lacking, is the emotional expression. A lot of times there is a lot of confusion between hunger and other feelings. And this is where the cue of perhaps a child is feeling really lonely, then feeds that loneliness with food, right? And so I know in my own practice, adults have a hard time accessing how they're feeling. So now we have adults who have a hard time accessing their feeling, modeling for kids a vocabulary when it comes to their emotions that's very weak and very limited. So one of the things that I think is really important is making sure our children start to recognize outside feelings, outside body language, and what's really happening for them inside. So it's kind of like upstairs, we see the primary emotion. For a lot of kids, they're able to access frustrated, angry, or really, really mad. And what does that look like? It looks like when we see teens rolling their eyes, shifting their weight, flipping their hair, right? Standing with their hands on their hips, not making any eye contact or whatever, right? I know that all too well. But it's what's on the inside, really making sure that our kids have access and connection to words like I was feeling insecure, I was afraid, I was confused, betrayed, jealous. That's a big one in middle school. Used, anxious, inferior, excluded. Another big one in middle school. I was panicked, humiliated, self-conscious, right? So these are all the uncomfortable feelings, not bad feelings. Sometimes I think people think there's good feelings and bad feelings. These are the uncomfortable feelings, and there's a ton of other emotions, obviously. So I challenge you to Google a wheel of emotions, print it out, hang it on the refrigerator. Another one of my favorites is like to print out emojis and have have a young child, have them guess the emotion of the emoji, make it fun. But the idea is that we really need to help kids expand the way they're feeling, because if they can talk about the way they're feeling, it increases communication. And if we increase communication, it just helps reinforce a better connection with us as parents, but also with their peers. I'm going to show you another activity that I've done. You can do these at home too. In the classroom, I would give kids paper plates. I would ask them to draw what they look like on the outside. We see a happy face. And here is how this particular student was feeling on the inside, which is so sad. And this one, I kept this image because it was just so powerful. You can see this person, it was a girl. She said, "It's a wonderful day. Yay, happy, happy, happy." And look what happened when I asked her how she was feeling on the inside. So much aggression and anger, punching and hitting and kicking. And so for me, as a school social worker at the time, this was like a huge red flag. Something's going on here. But I would be curious if you did this with your kids at home, and just to teach them, sometimes the way they appear on the outside doesn't match how they feel on the inside. So some good conversation starters that you can have about and related to body image. When I was your age, I thought my body was. My biggest concern about my body was my first wet dream, my first period. I remember thinking ... about my first crush. And I remember thinking sex was, right? So by you offering however much information you want to share about your own upbringing can be really helpful for starting a conversation. Now I kind of want to shift over to making sure that we all understand how to prevent sexual abuse And to remember that, like for young children, they're going to be really curious about each other, right? It's when we start to see power dynamic shift where we have a much older person taking advantage or perpetrating on a young child, that becomes problematic. So, if you think about sending your kids to sleepaway camp or even to day camp or any type of sleepover situation or just getting ready for school in general, there are three things that are just so important to know. One is using anatomically correct language. And the reason why is because, most often, if somebody's going to take advantage, perpetrate, and touch your child, by using anatomically correct language, it signifies to that person that that the child is educated, right? Don't touch my wee wee does not sound as powerful as get your hands off my penis, right? Or do not touch my vulva. So giving kids anatomically correct language is powerful. The second thing that they need to understand is that, or we as parents need to understand first and foremost, is that when people take advantage of children in this way, it starts with a grooming process. And that process often means that they're touching other parts of their body, and not just their genitals. And so something important to teach your kids is that nobody should be touching their bodies from their chest to their thighs, because that's all part of the erogenous area. And chances are, somebody who has bad intentions would be kind of massaging, rubbing, touching those areas first. And that's when you really want to, also foster the idea in kids that they have to be in tune with their bodies. The more you can talk about how does your body feel physically, not just emotionally, helps create that mind-body connection. And then the third piece of all of this is like the formula of no, go, tell. So no is like you're going to practice with your kids in so many different situations what a loud no sounds like. No, don't touch me, right? The second part of it is go, which means literally you got to get up and leave. And then who are you going to tell? And this goes back to last week. We talked about like, of course, we want our kids to come to us. We're their primary educators and teachers and parents, but they should have other trusted adults in their life that they feel comfortable talking to. Pornography is another, challenge for all of us in this generation. It's crazy to think that at one point, porn was available in magazines, which seems so light. And now, with the internet, kids have access to it in all kinds of ways. And even if you put on parental controls, our teens and young adolescents still need to understand why porn can, have a lot of problems if they watch it. I remember back in 2015, I was teaching at a Jewish day school, and oftentimes I would teach the students together, and then sometimes I would separate them. And I remember one day the boys, had them in class, and it was a question and answer day. I would just take the whole class, and they could ask me anything related to sexuality and relationships. And they were all like encouraging each other. Can you say it? Can you say it? Can you say it? I said, boys, what's going on? They said, Mara, we started looking at porn and we can't stop. And they were totally serious. This was a group of sixth grade boys. And so it really speaks to the addiction that porn can often have once they start looking at it. And what it then feeds into, unfortunately, is what their understanding of sex they think in a skewed way, looks like. The questions they were asking me, why do girls like to get spanked? Right. So there was a huge problem that we had to address. So really talking to your children about how porn is a movie. It's fake and it's scripted and it's not real. And the reason why adults look at porn is because, sometimes they're stimulated. We all are off of the five senses. And when adults see people having sex, it can feel good. It gives them pleasure, right? But it is not created for children. It is not created for teens. And it promotes a really distorted perception of all kinds of things. There's not realistic relationships. Women are often portrayed in a violent sort of way, or there's no negotiation of birth control or preventing sexually transmitted infection. The list goes on. And so really making sure your teenagers understand that it has this addictive quality and that it's not realistic, and that, it really isn't healthy for anyone. So talking to your kids and not just putting, I think, the parental controls is a really big part of pornography prevention. And then sexting is another big challenge for teens today, because, you can ask your teens by opening up the conversation, do you know of anyone who was ever pressured to send a naked picture? Why do you think, girls feel the need to send a picture more than boys? Or do boys feel that need more than girls? What's the difference? Is there a double standard? Lots of conversations that you can open up over sexting. But in terms of the information piece, it's really important that young people understand that if there's a picture of somebody who's under the age of 18 and it is sent to somebody else, that is called possession of child pornography. If your child then has that picture on their phone and they send it to somebody else, that's called distribution of child pornography. This is really scary. It's really scary for a few reasons. It may not have been intentional, right? But if they were to be found possessing or distributing such pictures, they could get, registered as a sex offender. That has some major, major, major consequences. I don't know what the laws are in New Jersey, but I know that they, in the past were extremely strict, where, we have seen teenagers convicted become sex offenders. And when you're a sex offender, you are not allowed near any children. That means like no school, no college, no baseball games, no shopping malls, no movies, like all the places that a teenager would want to hang out, they would be banned. They would be essentially under house arrest. So it's really important that young people understand what to do if they ever receive such a picture, never to distribute such a picture. And not only just the legal consequences, but what could happen to that person's future, their reputation. How do you get over something like that? So this opens up a lot of conversations about the dangers of sexting. One of the ways that you can help young people create boundaries, this is from an activity that I used to work with teens that had developmental disabilities. And because teenagers with developmental disabilities are such concrete learners, one way that we would help them is through this circles exercise. And then I realized I can use this with anyone, right? So in the circle exercise, you want to make sure they put themselves in the middle. For a younger child, they're probably going to put their family next and then friends. For a teenager, it's probably going to look like themselves, their friends, and then their family. But the idea is to ask them to write down the people who are in these circles that they trust the most. And then recognize that the more information you share, the more it's likely to then perhaps get leaked out to the next ring in the circle. And so you have to be really careful with whom you're sharing such information, right? So it's like the circles of trust need to be those closest people that you have the most trust with, that you believe wouldn't share private information. And I'm not even talking about sexting, right? I'm just talking about how to prevent kids from taking information that's personal to them and making sure that it doesn't go down that path of spreading gossip or rumors or just personal information that they may have about themselves or their bodies or who they like, right? And reminding them, that it's usually just a very limited amount of people, and it certainly changes over time, right? Who our children are friends with in kindergarten is going to drastically change, who they're friends with in middle school, high school, and college. So helping our young people and the relationships that they have and distinguishing the different types of relationships is really important, and the messages that we want to share about the differences in these relationships. One of the ways that you can do that is to ask them, right? To list the qualities that they like in themselves, to list the qualities that they would want in a friend, or to list the qualities they would want in a lifetime partner. Check out what they say, right? Because that's a great way to evaluate what else you're hoping that they would include. And remember, the healthy relationships and the foundation of the work that I used to do was based on honesty, equality, respect, and responsibility. It can be really powerful to help kind of illuminate and illustrate what these different qualities look like and what happens when they're missing in each one of these relationships. Ask them which ones are the most important to them, right? And, use this as an opportunity to see what is on their mind instead of just sharing what you think they should be focusing on. In terms of a healthy sexual relationship, I want to kind of emphasize a point about consent. So I think it was like in the first class, one of the participants had talked about like teaching consent to their child was like about this mutual understanding of sharing and reciprocity and making sure that there was this equality, right, in what was happening, even with um, playing with toys, for example, or taking turns. And those are the building blocks for understanding, what it means to be in someone else's shoes and fostering empathy. But there's a part about consent that I think people don't often touch upon that becomes really important, and that is body language. So, when I asked a group of teenagers, back when I was teaching, like, how do you know if somebody's into a hookup? Or how do you know two adults are actually enjoying what they're doing? So I would get answers like, well, their bodies were really close and their hands were touching each other and they were giving each other massages. Maybe they were groaning. Maybe they were just like moving around and seemed to be really into it, right? And then I would say, well, what about smiling? And smiling is so important because that is something that could look like somebody's enjoying it, but it could also be something that signifies somebody's really nervous. And a lot of people tend to smile when they're nervous. And I think helping young people recognize how important understanding body language is a really key part to understanding consent, because just because somebody's body is going through the motions doesn't mean that they actually want to be doing what they're doing. And so verbally checking in is part of consent, but also being able to read somebody's body language is also an important piece of that, because they may not actually want to be doing what they're doing. And checking in and recognizing that smiling is not always a symbol that somebody is actually enjoying the experience. Social media and fear of missing out. Instagram is one of the most popular things. Everyone in my grade has one except for two people. I'm honestly on it every 2 seconds. This is a quote again from years ago, but I don't think anything's really changed. And this is really like a focus on, the relationships that they have with one another. There's going to be a huge shift, and it's really hard for parents to suddenly, find that their high schooler doesn't really want to hang out with them anymore. And it's their friends that become, a big part of how they define their self-worth. Likes become like a currency. And so we also see self-esteem, sometimes take a nosedive. Just they're changing bodies combined with social media, combined with friendship drama, combined with crushes that they may have. So I kind of want to go through some different facets of resilience, because resilience is about the ability to overcome adversity, the ability to overcome problems that they will encounter. And if you'll notice, all of these pieces help, define what having a resilient child or teenager is all about. And I think really one of the antidotes to all of this is finding a skill that goes beyond, just like being good at math or being a friend, but giving kids an opportunity to develop whatever skill that they can master to feel really good. It gets them outside of their friendship groups. It gets them outside of themselves to really have a healthy competition with, something that they can work on, whether it's karate or it's swimming or gymnastics or tumbling or hockey or soccer. But being able to successfully master a skill is so important for confidence and self-esteem. As well as all of these things. And some of us are better at some of these things than others in terms of parenting. So, like bantering, for example, I really believe boys need to learn how to banter. And like sometimes some boys maybe like feel more shy or not necessarily know how to integrate. And so I would not be a good person to teach my son how to banter. I just don't know how to do it, and it doesn't come naturally to me. I'm not so witty and quick on my feet like that. And so I don't even know if my husband is, but this is where like having a role model in your circle of friends or having a favorite counselor or having a mentor would be really good, because it just adds to their toolbox of knowing how to navigate different social dynamics and different types of friendships. So another, kind of important part about relationships, that I think I really wanted to highlight for everyone is that not everyone is going to like you. And friendships are just one of many possibilities in life. That's why I just kind of went in, kind of a little bit of a conversation about why it's so important to have skills that we're good at. And when truth and friendship can't coexist, sometimes it is best to move on. And breaking up with a friend is also a skill, right? And so I'm going to go through a little bit of an outline on how to help your child navigate when they are in a relationship that maybe isn't going the way that they expected, or there's disappointment. And so I'm going to model for you what that looks like. And of course, adults can help you is number 4. So SEAL is a strategy that I would teach my students in middle school, starting in like fourth grade on up. You could even start in 3rd grade. You could probably start in 2nd grade. I just remember doing it a lot in 4th grade. But Rosalind Wiseman, she was the author of Queen Bees and Wannabes. And she is the inspiration behind the movie Mean Girls, for anybody who needs some context. So in her strategy that she calls SEAL, I thought this was really great. So let's say something's gone wrong in your relationship with the other boy, girl, friend, sweetheart, it doesn't really matter. So the first thing you're going to do is stop and ask yourself, what's this situation really about? Because sometimes we all do this. Like it becomes about everything in the kitchen sink, right? So really think about what specifically just happened. Then this becomes really important with the emotional vocabulary that I talked about a few minutes ago. You're going to put your feelings into words and describe exactly what you don't like and what you would have preferred instead. So I'm going to think off the cuff. I feel really excluded and sad when you didn't invite me to the mall with the other girls, and I really wanted to feel included. Then you're going to affirm your right to interact with people without being ridiculed, harmed, or dismissed. So let's say, the person that you're talking to then clarifies, well, I didn't realize you were going to be around, or I totally forgot, or I'm so sorry. Or maybe it's more like, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter anyway, right? I was totally dismissed. That's when the last part of this is to really think about, is this a friendship that I want to remain in? Is this a friendship that actually I don't think is healthy for me to continue, or sweetheart or romantic relationship? And then you could also take a break. Maybe it's just about not talking to the person for a period of time and then reevaluating. But I think it really kind of teaches young people a more mature way of getting in touch with their feelings being able to put those feelings in words, and then taking ownership over what feels right to create a boundary for yourself so that you can honor it and, live according to kind of life of all the qualities that we talked about before: respect, equality, responsibility, and honesty. So we're at a point in the presentation where I'm just gonna, give you a couple of tips. I have a couple of scenarios if anybody wants to ask questions. But of course, we talked about finding those teachable moments. None of this should ever be presented in the amount of time that I just did, right? It should be many, many conversations that happen in micro doses over a period of a long time. Respect the fact that your kid is not going to want to share everything with you. Sometimes you just have to kind of go with what they do tell you and share as much as you can. I know with my teenager, my oldest is 17 now, I literally have like a time limit, and then some sort of timer goes off and he's gone. Like, that's it. Like, I literally have 20 seconds to say what I have to say, and then he's out of there. So, know your kid, and that's why having conversations in the car is always great. Find humor. This was from a presentation that I did with a group of kids. I always love to do like really fun icebreaker activities. You could see they're all running to write things on the wall. But watch for nonverbal cues of interest and curiosity. Answer questions that keep the tone, keep it upbeat. Do you remember in the first presentation, I talked about how it should feel like a Broadway show, right? It should feel like you don't remember the details, but you remember the tone and the feeling behind it, using, issues in response to events on TV and technology, music, pop culture, avoiding the lectures, linking old information to new. And so I don't know if you guys have any questions, but these were scenarios that I pulled out. And if you remember, one of the first things that I did this evening was kind of went over like the 5 needs of our young people, so we could talk about maybe how to respond to some of these, or welcome any questions. I think we have a couple minutes left. That was a lot. Are you guys awake?
Sorry, what was it was just like there's like so much here.
I know.
So what's exactly the question?
Oh, yes. You know what? I can go back to that slide in the beginning, which was the affirmation, information giving, values clarification, limit setting, and guidance.
So is the question like how would we respond to
Yes.
each of the scenarios?
Yes. Or if there's any scenarios that you want to ask me, or situations, or you're curious how to respond. Or just
Can you give us some language for answering some of these? I think that these are some great ones that you brought up.
Sure. Anybody want to pick one?
How about number 4 and number 10?
Okay. So your 4th grader comes home and says, "What's a 69?" So let's go back. So let's talk about affirming, right? What a great question, although you might be totally shocked. It's really normal for, you to be really curious about something that you don't know. And I'm wondering, like, where did you hear this from, right? So where do you imagine a child might hear this from?
A classmate.
Yeah.
On a bus.
Older brother,
Right.
older sibling, maybe.
An older sibling, a classmate, maybe on the bus, right? So then that's an opportunity to say, well, how we've talked about, assuming you've talked about sex and intimacy, right? And how this is about, remember we talked about how when two adults put their bodies together in a very special way that feels pleasurable. Sometimes, adults do that in all kinds of ways. And there's a slang term called 69, right? And we also know that, whatever you've heard, I want you to know that, you know, when you um when you when you hear kids talking about sex, that's really private information. And it's not something that you should be talking about publicly. This is the values clarification. And when you have questions about, sex or what kids are talking about sex, I want you to come to me or to dad, because we really are the ones who can give you that information. And, next time, I'm so glad you came to me, but next time you have a question, I hope that you come back again because we want to be your go-to people. You could also, like, as your child gets older, they do need to understand that sexually transmitted infections are spread through oral, anal, and vaginal sex. That's just a fact. And so by the time your child is in 6th grade, they should understand that, there are 3 kinds of sex. And, there are so many ways that people can bring their bodies together that give them pleasure. But these 3 ways are also, how sexually transmitted infections are transmitted from one to the other.
I think specifically in regards to the one that we're on right now, as far as like limit setting would go, I would probably, and this may be wrong, but I would probably try to tell my son, everything that you said, and add to that that I personally feel as the one I want you to come to and speak to about these things that you may not be ready to hear this, but at the same time, I'm willing to tell you if you're too curious and are going to try to find it out anyway. Like, I'm going to be your partner there and I'm going to tell you. And if it comes to that point, then I would probably uh, apply the other one that was mentioned, which is keeping a sense of humor about it.
Mm-hmm.
Tell them what it is. I would tell them in a comical way. And I would point out how silly it looks and why kids would probably want to talk about that, you know, and just keep the sense of humor about it, keep it light, and probably point out the corrupt sense of humor in the other kids to be joking about that and just assure him that he doesn't have to join that crowd.
I think that's really great. And I think that, it kind of speaks to just how natural, obviously, it feels to be able to normalize his curiosity instead of making him feel bad. And that, like, there's a healthy and mature way of talking about it. And sometimes when kids are in a group, it does become silly and appears, confusing. And this is how sometimes your friends might react to information that they don't really know about.
Sure. And with that being said, I have I can't think of anything offhand, but there have certainly been times where I've told my son, like, listen, I'm willing to talk to you about things, but I also want you to understand there's some things I don't feel you're ready to hear.
Mm.
And that usually ends well. He usually at least tries to understand that, coming from me in the sense that, like, I'm willing to talk to him about things, but there's some things that I would like to withhold rather
Mhm.
than rather than just dismiss them or act like they don't matter, to just tell him flat out like that, like you would tell an adult,
Mhm.
like, hey, this isn't something that I'm ready to speak about,
Mhm.
you know.
Thank you.
Sure.
Does this feel realistic to everyone, or are you struggling a little bit, or
Can you give us more examples with the other questions? I think it's helpful for me.
yeah. So I think somebody said did you say number 10, you discover your 16-year-old has been having sex?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, some of it obviously is going to come down to like your family values. And I'm just going to take like one avenue here, but obviously it may sound different depending on like if somebody is practicing like a certain type of religious lifestyle or more observant or like more or less traditional, right? But one of the things that you could do is affirm, obviously, that I recognize at this stage, like, you're dating or that you're um, become a lot more independent. And you have to be careful because while you discovered that was it the condom one or was it just that they were having sex? I can't remember. You discovered that your 16-year-old has been having sex. So what does that really mean? We don't have a lot of information in terms of like, well, I hope you didn't actually walk in on them, but that could have happened, right? But I think that however this discovery was made, I just want to make sure you've really thought about like, did you have conversations about what we would do if the condom broke? Did you have conversations about, if your partner has ever been with anyone? How well do you know the partner? How did you come to make these decisions, right? Like really kind of making sure that they have all the information that they've thought about. And then there's that values piece. I mean, you could say, I'm really disappointed because I was hoping that you would wait until you found a lifetime partner. You could say, look, I was hoping could wait for a lifetime partner, but I realized that, this is a choice you made. And one of the most important things is that you considered the other person with respect. You considered, the fact that, you have a level of commitment to them, that you're really honest, that, there is a mutuality, that you have a good relationship. And then in terms of limit setting, I mean, it's really hard with teenagers because they have a lot more freedom, to some extent. And so you could say to them, like, I really hope that you wait. Just because you had sex one time doesn't mean you have to keep doing it. Or you could say, listen, I realize that this is happening, but I would prefer that, you kind of take a pause and reevaluate. And then the anticipatory guidance here is really about like, kind of reminding them about um, the sort of what you're hoping that they would find in a partner. Because if they're having sex when they're 16, how many other partners will they continue to have down the road? So making sure they're making good, sound decisions about the qualities they're looking for when they find themselves in a relationship with someone and reminding them that, you know, sex is just one of many possibilities and ways of connecting. And there's lots of ways to experience pleasure, and it doesn't have to be with sex. These are really hard situations, as you can see, especially if it's something that's already happened. Um, and you have to really be careful because if you say no and it's expressed with, judgment, then they could feel really bad about what they've done. And sex itself isn't bad, right? You just want to help them make better choices. And you don't want them to then rebel to such an extent that then they're like sneaking around or using that against you in such a way that like, well, oh yeah, now I'm gonna have a lot of sex with a lot of people. And so you just want to make sure that you're helping them be responsible, you're helping them think through what consequences could be when you have sex at the age of 16, and you're helping them by reminding them what your expectations or limits are. And, everyone makes mistakes. It's okay. You can still, do things differently the next time.
Does anyone have any last minute questions? I know we all wish that we had a lot more time with Mara. I know I'm lucky that I can talk to her anytime I want. And I think that I think it would be great to have more classes together. I know I got a lot out of it. Does anyone have anything else that they wanted to say or ask?
Just to thank you for teaching this. This is like so much broader and bigger than what I envisioned when I saw the like blurb announcing this webinar. And yeah, thank you for putting it all together.
Oh, you're so welcome. It is a lot bigger and broader. And I feel like, this is the hardest part of talking to our kids about sex and sexuality. It's, talking about puberty and the changes. That's easy. Those are just facts, right? And you could read it out of a book. But it's navigating situations and really understanding how kids grow and change and how their needs change, and the nuances of what becomes important, and I think more than anything, I want one of the takeaways to be how just important it is to um, make sure that the messages that we give to our children really model and affirm and help them feel good about themselves. Because, Rivka and I see in the practice all the time, like problems related to um, people who hold tension and stress in their bodies because their parents and their upbringing or their culture just contributed to an environment where there was no outlet to experience pleasure or their emotions. And all of that then gets internalized on the inside. So if you're walking around like this all the time, how can you fully relax? And it's hard to think of our kids as like sexual beings, having sex someday, but we all want them to experience pleasure. That's what this is about. It's not about like intercourse. It's just about we all deserve the right to feel and experience pleasure. And we can do that by helping them feel good about themselves and giving them the space to process their emotions. And if we can do that, they're less likely to become a client someday.
Yeah, I appreciate this covered like many different details and aspects of a child's evolution, and for parents to help guide them through that. It wasn't just as simple as like how to talk to a kid about puberty or something. It's really like how to help guide them with their like perspectives toward these things, how influence from their peers can either make that easier or more difficult. Usually, probably more difficult. This is serious stuff, and it needs to be 3D. And I think you did a really good job with it.
Thank you.
So like I said in the beginning, we're going to be sending out an evaluation soon, tomorrow or the next day. So we would really appreciate if you would fill it out and let us know content wise, if feedback, what you particularly got out of it, what are other topics you would want us to cover, what we could do another we could expand upon this also, like some of the scenarios. I think if you have ideas of things that would be really helpful, or if you have ideas that you would like to cover in classes, like for couples or for adulthood, or for children, how we would really like that feedback, and about the format, as far as Zoom, and as far as it was 3 sessions, 1 hour each. We're interested in feedback about that and the price point, so many things. So if you could please fill out the survey and give us as much information as possible, we would really get a lot out of that. And we really hope that you enjoyed, and stay tuned. We have in November, we have a women's sexuality support group with Hannah. So that's runs many times throughout the year, and she's another amazing resource at our practice. So that will be for women, and I think that she's going to be talking a lot about like desire and pleasure. And then in the January, we're going to run a group for couples and another men's group in the early part of the year. So those are some things we have coming up. So stay tuned and yeah, be in touch with us. Anything else you would like us to do or comments? And we just thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.